Okay, wonderful. All right, so today's topic is about Indo-European, and I'm glad you're here because this is something that really kind of requires elaboration, not just reading in the book, which you have probably already done before coming here. So tell me, all of you have studied another language in addition to your L1 English. So what is the first thing that you notice when you start studying, when you start working, studying another language, a foreign language, a language foreign to you?
More complex.
How complex it is, yes. And also, what do you notice that, you kind of like tend to focus on if there are any similarities. You kind of like want to focus on those similarities, like, thank goodness, at least this word looks like an English word. So those are called the cognate words. And if you study, the chances are if you've studied something like what we typically offer here, Spanish or French or German, what languages have you been taking? Because you have a language requirement for your BAs. German? Spanish?
I took ASL.
ASL? Yes. Yeah, that's a different thing about in terms of like cognates. And Franco, you speak Portuguese.
Portuguese and Spanish.
Yeah, so what do you notice why is Spanish so easy for you, for instance, as a speaker of Portuguese?
Because I learned that one first.
Oh, you learned that first, okay. Let's talk about French. Do you know French?
No. I can understand Italian quite well, especially reading, but I can't speak the language.
And why is it that you can understand Italian?
Because we're so similar.
Yeah, it's a Spanish.
Yes.
It's a Romance language.
And guess why they are similar?
Because they have the same root language. Yes.
Because they are members of the same language family. Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, French, Catalan, those Romanian also. Those are members of a language family which is called Italic, and sometimes it's referred to as Romance. And then, people have this idea that, if you speak a Romance language, those are romantic languages. No, don't make that distinction. I mean, that mistake. Romance is different from romantic. But that Romance or Italic branch is one of the 10 currently identified branches of what we will be looking at as Indo-European. So Indo-European languages are are languages that are spoken in many European countries, or most European languages are Indo-European, and they're called Indo-European languages because they are also spoken in India. So in India you find languages that are related to a lot of European languages, and of course vice versa. And most of the languages that we offer here at our universities, they are Indo-European languages, even though you can also study Arabic and Japanese, and those are not Indo-European languages, and they, at the get-go, they seem like, oh, this is a hard language. And they look much harder for us because they are not in any way related. But most of the languages that we study here, they are Indo-European languages, and that's why we start noticing that, okay, there are these similarities. That's a word I know. Like for instance, in German, you study German, and you notice that there are all these words that you already know, and they're easier to learn because that's an English word. It's very close to an English word. So this is what happened. back in the 18th century, in 1700s, there was this person who was called Sir William Jones. And so Sir William Jones was a British man. He was an Englishman, and he was a judge. So he was a lawyer. He was sent during that time, as you know from your history. India was part of the British Commonwealth, and Britain sent their administrators there to India. So Sir William Jones was stationed in India. And he was an educated man. He was a judge. He was a university-educated person, and part of the university education is that he knew classical languages such as Latin and Greek, and he was interested in languages in any case. So he also knew, some other languages. He knew about the history of English, so he knew how Old English worked and so on. And he goes to India, and of course, India is a place which is extremely rich in languages. They've got I want to say thousands of languages in India, and Hindi is one of the common languages spoken across India. And then there is this, what is no longer spoken, it's an extinct language, it's a dead language, Sanskrit. So Sanskrit in India is a little bit like Greek and Latin to Europeans, but it's like this sacred language that has a lot of meaning. There, but it's no longer spoken. So Sir William Jones goes there. He's interested in languages. He already knows the classical languages, Greek and Latin. He's interested in learning Sanskrit. And what he notices is that, wow, there are all these words that I already know, that I have learned already, when I was studying Latin, when I was studying Greek, and I already also know them, that they are existing in certain forms, very similar kinds of forms, in English, in German, in French, and so on. So back in 1789, after studying this for a while, so he was writing these words, making these word lists in different languages and comparing, having these columns and comparing how the words appeared in different languages. So what he finds is that there are these similarities, but that there are also consistent differences. Consistent, not like completely random, but consistent differences. So what he did, he wrote a paper which today we would call it a paper in comparative or historical linguistics, and he gave that paper at the Asiatic Society in Calcutta at a scholarly meeting there. Of the meeting of the Asiatic Society. And this is the key of what he said in that meeting. This is kind of like the gist of that. You've got a quote from his paper also in your textbook, but this is kind of like shortened version of it, what you have there in your book. So he said, Sanskrit shared with Greek and Latin a stronger affinity than could possibly have been produced by accident. So strong indeed that no philologer being like a linguist, old-fashioned term for a linguist, so strong indeed that no philologer could examine them all three, Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin without believing them to have sprung from some common source which perhaps no longer exists. And of course, people had been studying languages before, and they had noticed this same thing, the very thing that we notice when we start studying a language that is relatively closely related, that there are these shared words and shared structures. And William Jones was not the first person to have noticed that, of course, but he was the first who went on record by pointing out that this may be all these languages may be coming from a source that no longer exists. Because before that, you get these lay proposals that, all languages derive from, don't write this down, this is a false proposition. All languages derive from Latin. No. All languages derive from Hebrew because that's the language of God. No. People had these kind of like false ideas of why languages resemble each other because they have a common source that we still have access to. But Jones's proposal was unique because he proposed that this is a source that no longer exists. This language has not died, but it lives in all these various languages which show similarities between each other, among one another. Okay, so what was this language? And of course, because these languages that Jones was looking at, they were spoken in many European countries, many European languages belonged to this group that shared these similarities. And also many Indian languages, like Hindi, for instance, and now Sanskrit, which was, an earlier, older language. So he called them Indo-European. And often referred to as common Indo-European, or you've seen probably Proto-Indo-European. So common Indo-European, or CIE, or Proto-Indo-European, PI. This, of course, the next question is, when was this language spoken? And the hypothesis is your book gives like 4,000 BC or BCE, and it's also sometimes given us 3,000. So I'm going to put down 3,000 or 4,000 before Christ or before Common Era. So that's the estimate. Of course, it's an estimate. We don't know, and there's new research coming up, like this new film that was a Nova film that we were referring to, Indo-European horse warriors, and this is pretty much the consensus among historical linguists that 3,000 or 4,000 before Common Era. So again, then there's another question: if we can establish that it was about, and this is what I promised in the beginning of this class, that we're going to be going back some 5,000 to 6,000 years to go to the origins of the English language. Of course, English wasn't even existing then. So the next question, logical question, is, if it was spoken around that time by people who we refer to, of course, they didn't refer to themselves as Indo-Europeans. That's a later added label for them. They were maybe these Kyrgyz. Your book mentions those. There's a historical linguist, comparative linguist, Maria Gimbutas, who has studied, actually she's an archaeologist, but archaeology and linguistics kind of have to work together when looking at previous languages and previous lives of humans. So she talks about, that's referred to as the Kurgan hypothesis. That may have been the name of these people, and then later on they kind of dispersed, their language kind of changed, but I mean, it has changed a lot, but that's the hypothesis. We don't know for sure. When we go to prehistoric times, it's difficult to know for sure, but historical linguists, together with archaeologists, they have worked pretty hard to try to figure these things out. So again, if this is the time, what is the place where these people lived, and how come we now have these languages covering a big part of the globe? So what historical linguists do when they try to establish where something was spoken, they have nothing else to look at than the common vocabulary that current languages today, languages spoken today, or languages that have extensive records like Latin, for instance, and Sanskrit. Looking at the common words, shared words, can give an idea of the place. So if you look at words that have existed as long as humans have existed, like body parts, for instance, those are good candidates for trying to figure out relations between languages, genetic relations between languages. So body parts would work. Family terms like father and mother. If you think of the languages of the world, very often we see that it's papa or mama, or father, mother, sister, and so on. So family relations, those, actually I want to take that back. Papa and mama may be just baby talk, and we'll look at that in one of the exercises we'll do next week. But anyway, so father, mother, sister, brother, those would be good candidates for establishing genetic relations between languages. Flora and fauna. So animals and plants may also be good candidates, because if you have certain animal names shared by languages, you can kind of figure out that, okay, these languages are related and they share these animal names. So where do these animals exist? Where do they live naturally? And that can narrow down, or at least eliminate away a lot of places where these animals have never really existed naturally. So historical linguists have been looking at animal terms across various languages, such as a bear, or wolf, or bee, for instance, because they just don't live necessarily in all places. The salmon group, fish, lax, is also something that you find among many Indo-European languages, even though they today are far apart from one another. And then I mentioned flora, different plant names, the word apple. Those of you who have studied German, what is apple in German? Apfel, yes. And I'm trying to think, what is it in Spanish?
Manzana.
So it's not, these things sometimes change, and that provides, a big challenge for historical linguists. So then they try to figure out, okay, you know, some people just change the word changes, or they were affected by language contact and took it from somewhere else. So apple, beech and birch trees, elms, those are trees that just don't grow everywhere. Do apple trees grow here in East Texas?
Naturally, they're not even from this continent.
Exactly. Not naturally at all. And apple trees are very finicky. They require a certain level of cold weather, but they cannot survive extreme cold. So, me coming from Finland, we had apple trees in southern Finland, but when we went to visit, like in the fall, visit my relatives in mid part of Finland, we always took like, you know, a bag full of apples there, and it was like, wow, you brought apples, because apple trees didn't grow. You travel 3 hours, 2 hours, and they don't grow anymore. So you can find these areas around the globe where certain flora, certain fauna are found, and that can help to kind of figure out where the Indo-Europeans may have come. So the hypothesis today, which is based on archaeology, is based on this type of linguistic evidence, is that they originated somewhere on the plains of Central or Eastern or relatively Northern Europe or Russian steppes. So a lot of uncertainty there. You cannot pinpoint a particular, you know, area very narrowly, but somewhere on the plains of Central or Eastern Europe or Northern Europe. And I gave you that one handout which has a map of Europe there. And if you look at that map, it's this handout. And if you look at that one, the idea, and your book gives exactly the same information, that somewhere in between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, somewhere a little bit north of that area. So we're talking about the Russian steppes. It is today's Russia, and that would be the place where the Indo-Europeans originated. And if you look at that map, I will post this. This is what it looks like. They went to all over the world, and you see these arrows that indicate the branches of Indo-European language family. So there's this common, no longer existing base, common Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European, which then when people started to move, of course, they take their language with them. And what happens when people lose contact with each other? There's one group of people living in this place now, you know, hundreds of miles away from the other group. What happens to the language? Goes to different directions. Languages develop, they become different, and they will under no contact with the other speakers of the other group, they will eventually develop into different languages, so that they are no longer mutually understandable, but they will keep the resemblances. Certain structure they will keep. That's very often shared. Certain words they will keep. So I wanted to make a point also that, you know, we look at animal world, we look at the the plants, those would be shared words. Those are good candidates for establishing relations between language and also establishing what concepts, what notions needed names in the original place. The word for snow is also shared among most Indo-European languages. So people could deduct that, hey, if the word snow is shared, then this must have been a place where there is snow, so it wasn't East Texas, because we get snow every 5th year, and it typically melts before it hits the ground, so we wouldn't even have to have a name for snow. But anyway, of course, we can have it. But so there are no common terms, original terms for certain kinds of animals like tigers and elephants and so on. And you know, you could eliminate a lot of places because there were no common names. Of course, nowadays there are, because we borrowed these terms. Okay, this is the other handout that I gave to you. This starting by the common source, the Indo-European, and these are the kinds of lists, word lists, that Sir William Jones, you know, at his leisure, when he was not functioning as a lawyer in India, he compiled these lists, and what I have included here is a column for Sanskrit, the sacred Indian language, European classical languages, Greek and Latin, Gothic, which is a dead language, but it's relatively closely related to English. It's an East Germanic language. And Old English, which is the ancestor of present-day English. The last column is for present-day English. So if we look at the word for the name father, in Old English, you already know what it is, because we looked at the Lord's Prayer, Fader ure, our Father, Father our, and it was Fader in Old English. Now in Gothic, the dead East Germanic language, the word was Fader. Gothic, there's a Gothic Bible that, you know, Gothic is, it has been recorded, so we know quite a bit of that. So Fader is almost the same as Fader, and then we have Sanskrit, Pitar, Greek, Pater, Latin, Pater. What do you notice? Because if you just glance at these words, you're like, those are different words. Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin, those are different words. But what you notice is a consistent difference. There are similarities, they end kind of the same way, but when we have, let's look at a couple other words. The word for nephew in Old English was nepha. If there's a line, then that particular word in that language is not relevant for this argument. In Latin, nephew is nepos, and in Sanskrit it was napat. Okay, so the word for far in Old English, fair, like travel far, feor, in Gothic, phaira, in Greek, pera, in Sanskrit, paras. Go or fare, the verb faran in Old English, Gothic, the same, faran. In Sanskrit, parayati, in Greek, perein, and I apologize for my probably butchered pronunciation of Greek. I don't know much about Greek. And in Latin there is a prefix x, but if you delete that, it's the root is perior. Let's look at full, and in Old English it's the same full, except the O was elongated. In Gothic, fulls. In Latin, plenus. That's where we get like plenty. Greek, pleres, and Sanskrit, purnas. Two more. Pig in Old English was fer, and in Latin it's porcus. That's where we get pork because we borrowed it from French. And it's not that it's like an original English word. We had fer. And the word for feather in Old English, feather, in Latin, penna. So our pen comes from the word feather because we used feathers we didn't, but our ancestors used feathers to write. In Greek, pteron, and in Sanskrit, patra. Now, having looked at this very, very limited data, what can you notice about Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin versus Gothic, Old English, and present-day English in terms of the sound when Gothic, Old English, and present-day English have the sound F, like in father? What do Sanskrit and Greek and Latin have instead? What sound? The P, 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 P. So when Sanskrit and Greek and Latin have P, Gothic, Old English, and present-day English have P. This is not a random difference. It is a consistent, almost predictable difference. And we'll be looking at many more of these, doing some exercises so that this becomes even clearer. And what this means is that when languages go separate ways, the pronunciations may change. In certain groups of languages, it may change, and in certain groups of languages, it doesn't change. So which one do you think changed? Did P become F, or did F become P? Educated guess.
Probably P became F.
Yes, it's true. P became F. Okay. So what is the Spanish word for fish? Pez. And so again, we see this kind of similarity. And this is sometimes, not really emphasized in foreign language classes, even though it would be a useful thing to emphasize. But you can do it if you ever teach a foreign language. So you can say, okay, always when you have this sound, you will find predictably another sound in English, and that helps people to acquire the language. But this is something that, because all these languages are related, Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin, and Gothic, and Old English, and present-day English, because it's the descendant of Old English. These are Indo-European languages, and we could add several other columns, but we can fit it on the same paper to be more convinced about these things. Now, German doesn't fit here because in German there was another kind of a sound change, so that or other kinds of sound changes, and what kind of a sound change a language has undergone that cannot be predicted beforehand. Of course, we can, when after it has happened, then we can figure it out. Now, this particular pairs like P becoming F. We will be talking later on about this, and it's going to be explained by a linguistic law, which is called the Grimm's law. And that's, those were the fairy tale guys, Jacob Grimm and his brother, Helm, I guess. So anyway, they collected, they were philologists, they collected folklore, they collected the fairy tales, grim fairy tales, which often are very grim, and they also were linguists, philologists, so they looked at languages and how they have changed, and they proposed this. Jacob Grimm proposed this, what is called Grimm's law, and then somebody amended it, and it became that amendation became Werner's law. Okay, so these kinds of words, if you look at these words, father, nephew, terms of relatives, family members, far, full, feather, these have existed as long as, people have existed, and birds have existed, and pigs have existed. So these are good candidates for figuring out relations between languages. Okay, another group of words that is really good in trying to figure out relations between languages are number words, because people have been counting for a long, long time, and they were counting during Old English times already. So these are groups of words that we can use. Let's look at the word 5, because you already see here a common discrepancy, predictable discrepancy, when in Sanskrit and Greek, panka and pente, then in Gothic and Old English the word was with an F, so fimf or fief. Other kinds of sound changes also happen, like for instance from panka and pente to fimf, the Gothic word, the nasal in the middle of the word has changed from n to m. But that's not a random change. A nasal sound is, those are very closely related to each other. Also the relationship between p and f is just, anatomical, because both are labial sounds. They're produced by the lips. P is a bilabial sound, and f is a labial dental sound. And we'll talk about these in more detail when we go to the phonology section. But, let's look at the word for 6. That's shared, sus, hex, sex, size, cx, and we have 6 in present day English. You look at the Greek hex versus the Latin sex, and you're like, what is going on here? Why is the Greek word not starting with a? It's another kind of a sound change. If you listen to how and sound, they sound the same. They are both voiceless fricative sounds. So that's an explicable sound change. Now we're not going to go over all these words, but they're just examples. These are called cognate words because they are similar. Okay, we've got a little bit of time. I gave you several different handouts of basically the same thing, of basically the Indo-European languages, and they are very often depicted in a form that looks like a tree, an upside down tree, so that here we have, on the top of this, we have Proto-Indo-European. And now different scholars have divided these languages a little bit differently, or to more, with more detail or with less detail, and they sometimes may have a little bit different labels, but basically all these handouts give the same basic information. Now, what I would like you to do and I'll post this all, I'll scan these and put these online so you will have them there. But what I would like you to do is take this map and try to figure out what the names of these numbered arrows are. What are these 10 Indo-European branches that divided, split from that common Proto-Indo-European and went to different parts of the world? So you see one branch going a little bit to the northwest. Number 2 is going all the way, to the east. We've got 1, 3, and 4 going south from that home of Indo-European. 6 and 7 go southwest. Then you see number 9 going to Italy, and that is the ancestor of one of the very common branches. 8 is going to first to kind of like towards today's Spain, of course. I put some place names here like Spain and Italy, Armenia, Greece, Albania, Iran. So these are a little bit, they give a little bit of a hint of what the branch might have been. So historical linguists have divided the Indo-European languages into 10 groups, and you can see these here. If you look at this one, for instance, the first split is in this particular map, but not in all the others, is to the western branch of Proto-Indo-European and eastern branch of Proto-Indo-European. Look for English there. Where do you find English? Right here in the bottom, descending from Old English. Closest relation of English is today's Frisian, which has about 500,000 speakers, 500,000 speakers. This can be called the Anglo-Frisian group of West Germanic, and then there's East Germanic, North Germanic, and those all go under Germanic branch, and that is one of the branches of Indo-European. So this gives some kind of an idea. I like this particular way of representing the Indo-European languages. It's from the back of the American Heritage Dictionary. And here, the shorter slices of the pie, Proto-Indo-European, are dead languages. So it approximates the time of what time these languages became extinct. But you can find English, its predecessor, Middle English, before that Old English, belonging to West Germanic, belonging to Germanic, and then back to Indo-European. So look at these, not that you would need to memorize them or anything, but get a general idea. And I might be asking you these kinds of questions. Is English related to French? Yes or no? Yes, because they are both Indo-European. French belongs to the Italic branch of Indo-European. English belongs to the Germanic branch. Another question, is Russian related to English? Yes, because English is both are Indo-European languages. English belongs to the Germanic branch, Russian belongs to the Balto-Slavic branch of Indo-European. And I'm going to let you go, but thanks for coming up here, and we'll be posting this video later on, today or tomorrow. Okay, stay safe.